Pod. Pod. Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the 22 Gram Pod podcast. In this episode, we're talking to long-standing NME journalist Mark Beaumont. Mark started life as a music journalist back in the mid-90s and has gone on to work for many major publications in the music world. Mark was able to join Tom and I during lockdown from his in-laws in Suffolk, and when we joined him, he was having a slight problem with his daughter's toy wand.
Sorry, that's my daughter's magic wand falling on the floor. Can you put that in there?
It's all right, we use that as a jingle.
You might have to kick it out. It sounds like you're a bit mad where you are as well.
It's not too mad, really. We locked down in deepest Suffolk rather.
Oh, right. So you've got a bit of room.
Yeah, a bit of room. We're at my mother-in-law's house, so there's a garden. Because I've got a 2-year-old, so she needs somewhere to sort of run around, basically. You're quite faint, Tom. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good actually. Lux is 8 now, so she's a little bit easier to deal with in this situation. I think she understands a bit more. But I'm doing all right. Just been painting today, trying to find anything to do, to be honest.
Just to kick us off, can you just give us an idea about your background as a music journalist?
Okay, so I started writing for the NME in '95, so I was kind of slap bang in the middle of, or just post-peak Britpop, really, because I was a child of Britpop, and then so when I started writing, Britpop was kind of peaking, and we were getting sort of the second wave, which was still good fun, but not quite the cultural, not quite the cultural excitement, the volcano of creativity that was happening a couple of years earlier. So I got in with all those sort of second wave Britpop bands and had fun doing that. And then so I did like 18 months on the Melody Maker towards the end of the 90s, and then I became staff writer at NME in 2000, I think. And I've been back there ever since. But since around 2008, I've not been on staff. I've been freelancing for NME and The Guardian and The Telegraph and The Independent. I'm doing quite a lot for now. Various bits for Uncut, classic rock, things like that. So I kind of spread myself around quite a lot for the last 10 years. I've written various books on various bands, started with Muse, and done various ones on The Killers and Jay-Z and Kanye and stuff like that. So okay. I've got myself around a bit.
Yeah, it's quite a varied mix, to be fair. So I guess you're in a good position then when there's a bit of a transition from, like you said, a second wave of Britpop into like this noughties period. Like, what do you remember of that time? Do you remember a significant change around that time?
I kind of found it a little bit disappointing for me as a writer, because there were all those Britpop bands I really enjoyed, and you'd either had they'd reached their peak and faded away a little bit, the ones I really liked, or they were too big. They were so big that me as a new writer, I wasn't getting a chance to interview them a lot. People like Pulp and Suede and Blur. I mean, I managed to get to Australia with Blur for a week, which was fantastic. But I didn't get the chance to sort of get to know those bands as they were coming up. And, I really enjoyed a lot of the bands I did get to meet as they were coming up in the late 90s. But by then, I was, a child of Britpop, and I really liked all the sort of melodic sort of fun stuff. But as I was sort of getting established, what tended to be happening was that the NME was kind of pushing sort of less interesting scenes for me. People like stool rock, people were sitting down on stools and putting woolly hats on and all this sort of fairly, great music that wasn't really danceable, stuff like the Verve and late 90s Radiohead stuff. So all the sort of clubs were getting a bit boring, and you couldn't really go and dance there anymore. And the scenes weren't really sort of hitting with me. So when we get to the Strokes arriving, I don't think I was alone that in thinking that it was a whole new world, really. I mean, they really did hit quite hard in the NME office. We were really excited by them, and it really did feel like something brand new was happening, even with that one band. And we did that issue at the NME, which was sort of looking into the various other New York acts that were revolving around them. People like Yeah Yeahs and Andrew WK and people like that. And that was a really great move. I can't remember who came up with that idea. It might have been Alex Needham's idea, but a really great idea to do a whole issue around those New York bands, because that really did sort of cement something that, it was very clear that the British scene was stagnant really, and had been for a few years. Britpop had kind of run out of steam, and so to sort of look to America, which we'd kind of ignored for quite a long time since grunge really, and see that actually things are really quite vibrant there. That was very exciting. And as we saw in the next couple of years, it really sort of hit home in terms of bands across the UK just springing up in various styles and all over the place, and starting something of their own. I mean, it really did spark the whole thing off.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the time, the Strokes were known as the saviors of rock and roll by NME. Was that something that you all kind of believed in?
I don't know if I did. If you throw the phrase "savior of rock and roll" around, that around an awful lot for so many people, because we wanted a savior to come along. But it did seem like the industry had kind of bought up all the alternative, the independent labels had kind of been bought up by the majors, and it seemed like in alternative music as it was had been kind of commodified to a degree, and we were getting these sort of knoll rock bands, as we would call them, that just sounded like Oasis being churned out because Oasis were making so much money for everybody.
Yeah.
So you had all these sort of very formulaic bands coming through, and we thought it was kind of a little bit over to a degree, and guitar music could kind of run its course. So when you get something that sounded very independent and it sounded like it was recorded in some basement somewhere on a 10 quid microphone, but sounded just really exciting and really thrilling. I mean, like a real sort of new wave sort of vibe to it. I mean, it was very, very exciting in the office. I mean, everyone was inspired, I think, and inspired also to go out and try and find stuff that matched it from the UK.
Yeah, and that links in quite well to, obviously, because we've got you here, I've got to ask you what you, how you know Tom, basically, and what you made of the Paddingtons back in the day.
Oh, yeah, well, I had a great time with the Paddingtons. I think that's the only time I ever went to Hull. Was to go and see the Paddingtons. I think, did we did an interview, Tom? I can't remember. Did we? I think we did.
Do you know what? I can't remember. Yeah, I think we did. Was it an Adelphi show or something like that?
I can't remember where it was. The only thing I remember about Hull is that I kind of got out of the place thinking that I think it's sort of designed overnight to revolve so that you can't find the road back to the station again once you're in. The whole town kind of just shifts around on its axis a little bit, so that where you thought the station was, it's not. So
yeah, maybe people used to think that they didn't want to leave there sometimes when they went, but maybe they just couldn't leave.
Yeah, no way out. Get out as some sort of vortex. But what I thought was interesting about that, what was kind of enlightening about going to Hull and seeing you guys, was that scene that happened in the noughties. It wasn't just like Britpop where it was, or punk or something like that, where it was okay, you've got stuff in London happening in London, you've got stuff happening in Manchester, and there's maybe sort of bits and bobs dotted around elsewhere. This was like a nationwide kind of explosion, if you like. I mean, everyone was obviously sort of saw the Strokes or saw the Libertines or whatever they were getting their inspiration from, and at the same time kind of came up with this exciting music from across the country. You had your Kasabian doing your rave rock in the Midlands, and you had you guys doing your thing up in Hull, and you had Kaiser Chiefs doing their sort of Britpop revivalism in Leeds, and Libertines in London. It was everywhere, and it was all different. And the stuff that was going on in Glasgow, this kind of art rock thing. So just out of nowhere, all of this stuff suddenly descended, and it wasn't just exciting when the Strokes came along. It was just a constant sort of source of excitement. Every week there was like, oh look, who's this block party? They sound amazing from London. Oh look, so over here there's the Future Heads from Newcastle, or I don't know if it was Newcastle. It was from the northeast. So it was a really exciting time. And what frustrates me about it really is that what the NME didn't do. I think we were kind of so swept up in it, and we couldn't really make head nor tail of what was going on, because none of it sounded the same necessarily. It was all just exciting guitar music, and we never really came up with a name for it, and that was kind of frustrating. You had, if you look back at the late 70s and say punk and new wave and Britpop or whatever, and these scene names which the NME has always been so good at coming up with, we really fell down on that. that particular period, because there wasn't really any one defining element of all of it. And that means that basically it got defined in the end by the people that didn't like it. So the people that liked it didn't get a chance to give it a name, or couldn't give it a name. But the people that didn't like it called it Landfill Indy, and that's what stuck. And so we it's the first sort of really exciting scene that's happened in UK music where we're supposed to be embarrassed about it because it's been defined by the people that didn't like it. And that's frustrating when you look back at it.
That's kind of annoying, isn't it? What would you call it now if you could name it?
Oh God, yeah, I still don't know if it's possible. We tried things like Grot and Roll, but that was the thing. They weren't really very good, very positive names, and not stuff that you would want to pick out and go, right, I'm a Grot and Roller.
Right.
I think, look back now, I think we should have called that whole sort of London scene with the Libertines and Razorlight and all that sort of stuff. I think we should call that Boz Rock, after Boz, from the guy that did all of the sketches from the Dickens books, which I think might have been a bit too literary, but kind of in the right sort of vein. I don't know if maybe that would have stuck, Boz Rock. But ultimately, we kind of came up with a New Rock Revolution, which I think was just meh.
Is that when the Arctic Monkeys came around?
Yeah, well, it was kind of we did New Rock Revolution kind of when the Australian scene kicked off, and and people like that, which again made it difficult to pinpoint the UK scene within it, because it was talking about like guitars across the world rather than just in the UK. So yeah, we were kind of stymied by the fact that it was just so many different sorts of music all at once, and how do you define that? How do you try and sort of condense that into one thing that people can relate to?
It's interesting you talked about that term Landfill Indy, just because I read one of your recent articles and it said that you've been talking to other NME journalists and you felt like a mutual responsibility for that term. Yeah. Is that right?
You should. It was but the thing is that people have kind of taken it on, and even the people involved with it have kind of accepted that it's something that we should be embarrassed about, or the UK should be embarrassed about, and people should have these indie amnesties, and oh God, I'm so ashamed I liked a Rake song or whatever,
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
it was really good fun at the time. It was like every week there was some new, really great song coming out. It strikes me that what I remember most about that period, I think, is it was a period when I started DJing quite a lot, and I was kind of formative in starting Club NME. We did we got offered. Well, basically, I got offered to DJ and run a second room in a club called Kill All Hippies in London, and I basically decided that I'd try and ask everyone in the office to learn to DJ. Every week or every month we'd do it, there'd be a new clutch of brilliant songs, and everyone knew them, and there was a real sort of a cultural explosion happening. And so when I look back at it, that's what I kind of remember most, is just seeing really packed, sweaty rooms full of kids just having the times of their lives. And that wasn't just in the UK either. We go off to, the Club NME became sort of the biggest club franchise in the UK for a while. It was in every single city pretty much. But we go to
I remember that.
And we have, if you find it all across Europe, it seemed to be really sort of infecting everywhere. It was a really exciting time, and people really enjoyed it and shouldn't be ashamed.
Yeah, I think even our band played Club NME, so.
Which Club NME?
And we never played outside of Hull.
So there must have been a whole Club NME.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, got some good bands on actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what we found with this, because a while every town had a Club NME, and then people realised that actually they just had a really good club night and they didn't need to call it Club NME and pay a little bit of money for the use of the name. So they changed the name of the club and kept on with their great nights.
With all that in mind, Mark, and given the fact you've covered music now for over 20 years, do you think that was a unique time for guitar bands?
I think it was unique largely because of what I said about how varied it was. When you've got sort of other scenes and other eras, you look at Britpop, and ultimately you've got kind of, a jaunty sort of melodic side to it, or you've got the surly Oasis sort of side to it. There wasn't a huge amount of variety. Britpop had its own particular sound, and when you're looking at guitar music from that period, that's what a lot of it sounded like. You look at the guitar period in the late 70s, you've got sort of punk and new wave. It's still sort of jagged, and there's a unity to it. This was unique, I think, because it was just everything. It was all sorts of different stuff, and you never really knew what was coming at you. and it didn't seem like there was much interaction in terms of the influence between bands or between areas either. I think everyone was kind of, the roots were in the Strokes and maybe to a certain degree the Libertines, but ultimately everyone kind of did their own thing. And I think so it's a unique time really because people were just inspired by the time rather than any particular sound of it. And I think everyone could see and feel there was something happening and everyone wanted to get involved. And so that was kind of unique. I mean, it was a real sort of wave of inspiration and excitement across the country. And a lot of us got quite swept up in it. I had a great time.
Yeah, I agree actually. And like, everyone was just, yeah, you're right. Like everyone was just kind of a bit different. And that's probably what was really good about it. Because I remember, no one ever really sounded alike each other. And like, I remember being like, people saying that we sounded like the Libertines or this and that. And I always used to think like, we never really sounded like the Libertines, really. We kind of, if anything, like people used to dress the same. That was probably the only thing that was the same about any of the bands. But like musically, I think they were like very different.
Yeah, there was a certain sort of scruff bag look that was fairly universal across most of the bands, wasn't there? But individually in the various areas, there was a likeness in terms of sound. I mean, a lot of the Leeds band had various threads in common. The London bands, there was a whole sort of world of people around the Libertines and people that followed on from that.
And Mark, how about your favourite or most underrated bands from that era? And then me and Tom were reading one of your articles today about your top 20 Stroke songs. I'm guessing they must rank quite highly.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Strokes are key. I mean, a lot of those big bands I thought were great. I mean, there's very few bands in there that I didn't really like. I was particularly taken by the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, thought they were fantastic and one of the best live bands I've ever seen, actually. Absolutely riveting to watch. At the very early days, when the Strokes came out, we were kind of everyone was kind of scouting around, I think, for a UK equivalent or someone that was exciting, that would have the same sort of spirit. And there were various members of the NME team that really were backing the Libertines, and I thought, Libertines are great. At that time, I was backing 80s Matchbox Beeline Disaster, because their manager sort of played me some of their stuff very early on, and I'd gone to see them and just been blown away by this.
Yeah, they were great.
So there was going on in there. So I was kind of pushing them, even though obviously they were far less of a commercial prospect than the Libertines. And for a while, there was a bit of a sort of a standoff, just like the 80s Matchbox, all the Libertines going to be the ones that really, really break through here. And ultimately, it was the Libs. But the 80s Matchbox were I was a huge fan of them. People like Foals and Maccabees later on, and Block Party, Kasabian, Kaiser. I mean, all those big bands. And then a couple of, I was fairly, I was a big backer of bands that became big. That people might not necessarily think are quite so cool, but I'm still sort of quite proud of them. There's all those sort of bands, all these big bands that were out there and doing well and everyone knows about. And then there were some of the bands that didn't quite break through that should have done. And a band like the Holloways I thought was fantastic. Still think that band are brilliant. And, just had that one sort of minor hit. And then sort of in the background, the various sort of label nightmare went on that meant that their second album got delayed and they never really got the chance to follow up on it. And that's a really a huge missed opportunity, I think, because I thought that the second album was fantastic when it finally emerged. And those guys are just great. And, I'm still very good friends with them to this day. So there's sometimes there's those sort of bands, those frustrated ones that didn't get the respect and the attention they deserved. I think most of the other ones, I mean, we were in a good situation that the bands that we liked, if we promoted them well enough in the NME, then generally they'd do quite well and they'd sort of get chart hits, and so many of them did. So as much as it's not so much the bands that made it and had big hits that I look back on. It's more the ones that deserved that but didn't get it. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah. I mean, how did you decide which bands to back? Was it purely based on the music and how excited people were in the office about it?
Well, the thing was, it was all happening so quickly, and like I say, and there would be a new band every week. I'm not sure that there was necessarily a an editorial overview about a lot of it, apart from who was going to go on the cover. But I certainly wasn't in those meetings. The closest I had to pushing those sort of things was I was editing the singles page. So I'd find that, and that was a very difficult thing to do at that time, because I could only do something like 12 or 15 singles a week in the space that I had. It was all in sort of blocks. And so there's only so many songs you can get in there. And there were always far more than that were worthy of getting in those single places. And so it was frustrating that you couldn't really get everything in there. But it did mean that, with a little coterie of sort of 2 or 3 of us would sit together and decide what was going to get single of the week any one particular week. And that did have a certain power to it, because it would certainly get attention, and often it would chart. So that was quite an interesting thing. I mean, and then that would kind of maybe feed into decisions that would be being made elsewhere in the paper. But it wasn't up to me unfortunately, to decide who was going to get pushed and who wasn't.
I mean, Tom, did you feel the effects of that as a band when you got talked about in NME? Did you feel the benefit from that kind of thing?
I remember our first album, or even like singles and stuff. We got pretty good reviews, and I think it really helped us in a way, because like there was some of our other touring mates, like 10,000 Things, for instance. They used to come and tour with us quite a bit, and I remember when they brought their album out, it kind of ruined them, because they got a 1 out of 10 or something like that. And personally, I didn't think they deserved it. It was like, I used to love their album. Maybe I was a bit biased because they were on tour with us or whatever, but I genuinely thought that they were great. Like definitely seeing them live as well. But like, they brought their album out, and NME I don't know if it was you, Mark.
I think it might have been that one. Yeah, I thought.
What was it?
Yeah, it might have been.
I remember it clear as day, like reading it in the van, and it was when we were on tour as well, and I'd picked the NME up, and yeah, it was just, I read the review and I was a bit shocked, but it kind of, I think it just deflated them, obviously, and obviously like fans of the NME listened to it as well, because at the time it was still a big magazine, wasn't it? And these indie kids used to take it on board, I guess.
Yeah.
So I reckon, it definitely made a big difference. Anyway, yeah.
I can't remember much about the album, but I do remember thinking it was awful.
Fair enough.
I've got to ask you some juicy questions, Mark, if you don't mind, such as the best and worst bands to interview from that time.
See, this is tricky. For the best and worst bands to interview that time, I mean, you tend to find that the best and worst bands to interview generally are the best ones are the ones that you get the most, the best copy out of, and the worst are the ones that you get nothing out of.
Right, okay.
So I guess that in terms of who I interviewed at that time, I mean, some of the best ones would be like, I don't know if I interviewed the others, but you'd read stuff by the others, and that, what great quotes you get, what great interviews you get. You also sort of usually get some pretty damn good stuff out of the Liberties. In terms of the best interview I did during that time, it's not necessarily a band from that maybe particularly relevant to 22 Grand Pod, but the best interview I did at the time was Morrissey.
Okay.
Because whatever you think about the guy, I mean, every word that comes out of his mouth is gold.
Yeah.
Endlessly quotable man.
Yeah.
So that was just a gift for someone like me. And then the worst would be the people that just barely say anything. I would say people like Jay Maskis from Dinosaur Jr. who.
I think Jay Maskis has got to be like one of my favourite guitarists. Love Dinosaur Jr. They're very good.
Yeah, I mean, great music, but try interviewing the guy. I mean, half an hour.
I can imagine actually.
In half an hour, you might get 15 questions in, because he just pauses for 2 minutes after every question and just says yes. That's the Jay Maskis interview. But in terms of the bands that you would cover more often, I mean, I guess the guy from Crystal Castles fell asleep on the phone with me once. That was a pretty bad interview. And the best ones, I mean, a lot of them are very good. I mean, Johnny Burrell, I mean, what a great guy to interview, great quote, endlessly quotable people. I love those guys.
But what about, did you ever interview the Strokes?
Yeah, I went to New York for them. And they were okay. I mean, yeah, they were fine. I mean, they were generally quite nice, a little bit sort of glum. But I've interviewed Albert quite a lot since then, and he's always been a joy. He's always been really good fun and cheery and chatty, and yeah, great guy to talk to for a bit. Yeah, Strokes, good fun. I had a good time. When I was in New York with them, I think their manager invited me to go and play poker with them and Kings of Leon in his apartment.
I've heard about those poker nights, actually.
Yeah, I kind of rinsed them, to be honest with you. I felt bad just winning all the money off them.
I'm sure they're not.
Yeah, apart from the manager knew what he was doing, but the rest of them had no idea.
I guess more of a general question, Mark. We asked bands about the internet and the impact it's had on their music. What's the impact it's had on music journalism? Like, how has it changed over the years?
Well, I mean, it's been fairly fundamental, really. Obviously, we're seeing lots of publications closing down or just going straight online now, as the NME has, and many others sort of struggling to keep advertising coming in and maintain their income. So it has made a huge impact in terms of the industry, and in terms of the stuff you write, it means that there's kind of less meaty features to do. It used to be in the NME that there'd be maybe 5 or 6 big features every week. So there was quite a lot of that to go around, and I'd be doing an awful lot of that. These days, there's a lot less of that. You find that you're writing kind of more newsy reaction type pieces and comment pieces, and you generally have less access because people see the internet as being less important than print, even though the potential of people reading it is actually far greater, and the NME is far bigger online than it ever was in print. I mean, by a huge degree.
Okay, what in terms of numbers, kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, more people read the NME today in one day today than would have read it in about 2 months when it was in print.
Right. Okay.
It's phenomenal. I mean, it's ridiculous how successful it is. But yeah, in terms of writing stuff online, it means that there's less, like I say, there's less access. You spend less time with bands. You tend to be on the phone quite a lot more than you would be sitting face to face. I mean, you also find that what's been difficult for me as a critic, as you say, I've not shied away from giving bad gigs and albums bad reviews. And that's kind of getting more difficult now, I think, for people. I mean, I'm kind of lucky that I'm established and someone that's known a little bit for doing that sort of thing, that I can get away with it maybe a bit more. But I think if you're a new kid coming through and writing, it's a very difficult time to come in being critical. I mean, the internet is very down on people being critical of anything. And, fair enough when people are talking about, bullying or, being nasty to people on Twitter or whatever. But when you're criticizing someone's album or someone's gig, I think people are kind of starting to come down on that a bit, and artists sort of going, that's unfair, we've got feelings too, all this sort of stuff. And fair enough. But
right, yeah.
What you find now is that if you give a bad review, I mean, what you find, if you give a bad review, the comeback from it can be quite harsh and severe. And if you're not used to that, it can be very off-putting, and it can be off-putting for publications as well. So what that means is that you kind of end up people playing it safe, and you get 4 stars across the board. Everything gets 4 stars now.
Yeah, it's kind of boring, that, isn't it? I suppose, does this mean that they can kind of attack? This gives them access to retaliate, I guess, as well.
Well, I mean, yeah, but you don't really get. I mean, what happens is, I guess, that if you give something 4 stars, then everyone's happy, and you don't really get much of a response from that. If you give something 3 stars, people actually get quite shirty about that. People PRs and bands will sort of go, "What, 3 stars? What are you talking about?" And some fans will. Some of the worst sort of comebacks I've had have been from 3-star reviews, bizarrely. If you give something 2 stars, then I mean, it's like uproar. I mean, 2-star review is just unbelievable. Like, you'll get the industry will come out against you. Like musicians, you'll be in the center of some sort of storm somewhere or other. And if you give 1 star, then like even your colleagues will come out against you. You'll just it's the worst possible thing you could possibly do. And I think that's kind of off-putting for a lot of. I mean, it kind of, apart from the fact that it makes criticism fairly dull and
Yeah, it's good.
encourages everything to be just sort of homogenized, sort of mulch, and not really telling people what's good or not. I think the idea of sort of crushing criticism, which seems to be happening online quite a lot as a result of this, everything moving online. I just think it's, you wouldn't see it in films. I mean, films and TV, people can slag off whatever they like and give films dreadful reviews if it's bad. But in music, we seem to let bad music get away with it a lot more because it's kind of seen as unpolite or something.
Do you think it's a societal thing then, or not really? Because I mean, I guess there's a comparison with football now, where you hear managers and players saying you can't criticise your teammates anymore because they're not prepared for it. It's not going to work anymore. Do you think it's
I mean, there's a good thing. I think there's a good thing. Good movements being made in terms of protecting people's mental health online and things like this, and trying to stop people from being abused, and that's fair enough. But when people start to extend that into here's a dreadful record, and you're not allowed to say it's dreadful because some nice people have made it.
Yeah. And
people go and listen to a dreadful record and go, well, why did you make me listen to that dreadful record? You know what I mean? Last time I gave a one, you're talking about sort of in the early noughties when I gave something a bad review. The last time I did something like that, I gave a Tom Odell album 0 out of 10 or something in the NME, and it was national news. I mean, it was national news. There's a story about it in the actual. I mean,
people love it.
What's that about? You know what I mean? It's just a bad review for a bad record. But the other thing I was going to bring up about that is that you also find that since everything's online and being online means that everything has the same reach, no matter sort of what its basis is. You find that there's so many outlets that are all sort of plugging different acts that there's no consensus. There isn't anywhere like there used to be with the NME. You see what's on the cover of the NME and go, right, okay, that's the band that's being pushed this week. I'll go and listen to them. There's a consensus being forced upon you in some way or other, but there is at least something that you can focus on. Now there isn't any of that. There isn't one place you can go and go, right, oh, that's the band I need to listen to this week. And that's quite exciting. When publications do, or when online outlets do that, they've got a big thing at the top of their page, but it seems to shift down the page the more sort of stories go up there. And so there isn't really one place you can go and find out what everyone's talking about that week. And that's had an impact on what's happened within the culture, because it's more difficult for bands, I think, to get a momentum and to get traction when there's so many different outlets, all with different agendas and different tastes. It's kind of a weird.
Yeah, because the NME was kind of band driven, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't always supposed to be like that. I think in the noughties we kind of got criticised, probably fairly, for not being varied enough in terms of the genres that we were covering. We did a fair bit, but it was essentially we sort of doubled down on guitar music because there was so much of it and it was so exciting.
That's maybe one of the reasons why guitar music's not so as big as it would some of us had liked it to be now as well. Like, there's just so much going on and everything's all in one place.
You could say we overdid it. People got bored of it because there was so much of it about. There was a proper glut of it coming in, and there's only so much of it people could take, really. So,
what's your thoughts on like a revival of guitar music like that? Do you think? I know that we can't predict this kind of thing, but it usually comes back around. Do you think it'll be anytime soon, or what?
I think it will come around. I don't know. It's a weird one, isn't it? Because what we're finding with the new guitar bands that are coming through now is that there isn't a huge amount of variety. I think a lot of them are great. If you look at bands like Idols and Fontaines and Fat White Family and stuff that's going on in South London.
Yeah.
In terms of the pure guitar bands, I think there's some great stuff going on there, but it's pretty raw and it's pretty sort of punk, and it's based in some the gritty guitar stuff. There isn't the sort of variety necessarily. And you look at bands that started off guitar and have gone into other directions, like Tame Impala and stuff like that. And a lot of bands are kind of shifting away from guitars. They seem to think that they start as guitar bands and then they can move off into more electronic and psychedelic sort of areas.
Yeah, it's all psychedelic now, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. There's a lot of psychedelia going on, and I think to a degree, I think when I think guitar music will come back, it's never really gone away, but I think it will probably come back into fashion at some point. But I think it will come back into fashion as some sort of conglomerate of all of that, rather than I think we're going to see bands like Idols and Fontaines having these sort of album chart hits, but I don't think there's enough of a culture behind them to create a movement or a scene like we had with Britpop or in the noughties necessarily. Certainly not at this point, because there isn't really the apparatus to push it and to make it cohere. But I think that will come back around again. But I think it will be part of a broader idea of with the psychedelia and the punk and stuff like that coming together. We just need that one sort of kick-off band that gets everyone excited at once. That's kind of all you need with those things.
I saw, Mark, in one of your recent articles, you made a point about the current situation, which I thought was quite interesting. That maybe this could lead to, a whole new scene of new music.
Well, I mean, that was early on in the lockdown when I kind of thought that it would be possible that they'd stop the big gigs but still keep this kind of 50 people capacity smaller gigs going, which people want to get out. The hope was that if people would be able to get out and they would be forced to go to see smaller bands in smaller venues and maybe see some stuff and discover stuff that they wouldn't otherwise have done. That was the dream. I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen at this point.
Okay,
but it may be. I mean, we may find that in a year's time or however long it takes, they may well open the pubs and open the smaller venues again, and not necessarily allow the mass gatherings. So we may well find that smaller bands, the spotlight may fall on them a little bit more, as people are desperate to get out and see music.
Yeah,
I might start a new band.
Yeah, do it. It might be your time to shine again, Tom.
Any funny or good stories from the big names of that era? Obviously, just got to touch on the story on your Wikipedia page about Keith Richards.
Oh yeah.
I mean, how often do you get asked about that?
Well, every single time that I do an interview, I get asked. Yeah, that was crazy. Interview that I did on the phone backstage at every year the NME, the parent company, would have an awards ceremony to celebrate the best journalist that year, and in a back room there I did a sort of half-an-hour interview with Keith Richards where he came out with this thing.
Yeah, so just for context, Keith Richards, basically, you asked him, it's quite a funny question to be fair.
Yeah, we asked him what the weirdest thing he'd ever snorted was, and he said that the weirdest thing he'd ever snorted was his dad. And I was just like, what, your dad? And he's going, yeah, my dad. And then it kind of slowly dawned on me, he meant that his dad's ashes was what he'd been snorting. And that was, I mean, kind of weird, because obviously I just sort of handed it in and forgot about it. I thought, okay, that's just going to be a little, like couple-page sort of comedy little thing in the NME, and that's quite fun, and forgot about it. And then the next thing I knew, like a week later, I got a call. No, what was happening? It was I didn't know what was happening with the story, but I was asked to do a radio interview for the BBC about it, and they sort of turned up at my door at the morning, and they had this radio van. So I was literally just getting out of bed straight and pull some clothes on and get straight into this van and put the headphones on and start talking. And the first thing I'm talking to like Nicky Campbell or something on BBC, and he's saying, so this story that's on the front page of the Mirror today. And I'm just like, what? Front page of the Mirror? That was the first time I'd heard about it. It was like live on the radio. So he's sort of telling me about this, and I'm a little bit shocked at how big it's blown up. And then then they say, oh, can you hang on and talk to the Today programme? And I didn't, at that point, I didn't really know what the Today programme was. I didn't know it was this sort of flagship political sort of highbrow sort of discussion programme. And I'm just like, yeah, sure, I'll get on the Today programme, fine. So I'm sort of chatting away on the Today programme. And I'm, with a very serious, I can't remember who it was I was talking to, but a very serious radio news journalist who's sort of going, isn't it outrageous? He's really giving me a hard time. He's really berating me for it. Isn't it outrageous that Keith Richards did this? And I've sort of, I reach breaking point at the end of my tether and sort of go, what's outrageous about it? Keith Richards was put on this earth to snort everything he can. It's an honour to be snorted by Keith Richards. I hope he's still around when I go, so he can snort a bit of me. like absolute silence on the Today program. I silenced the Today program entirely, and they just said thank you. That was it. So that was quite entertaining. But then, the whole furore around it was kind of weird because, it was. Keith came out saying, Keith came out saying he was misquoted, and then sort of later sort of went back on it because there was all sorts of issues with the States sort of touring in America, the Stones touring in America, which this thing might have damaged. So I just kind of went along with whatever they were going to say, and ultimately he did come around and confirm the veracity of the story. So I was kind of pleased about that. But yeah, a bit of a mad story, really. I've still got it on tape. I did have a chat with the band Ash. I was going to give them the quotes and maybe they could write a song around it. We were talking seriously about doing that, but I'm not sure I actually own the tape. I think it's owned by the parent company. But there you go. I've still got it. But that was quite a weird story. I've had a fairly wild times out there with some of the bands. Probably the wildest one I think was I went to Tijuana with the Kooks. Probably sort of 2006, 2007, something like that. They were making a video for She Moves in Her Own Way and sort of galloping up and down on Tijuana Beach with horses, I believe. And, apart from the fact that we obviously went absolutely insane in Tijuana and God knows what, the weirdest thing about it was obviously quite a dangerous little town, and the band were filming the last few scenes of this video, and the director said, "Okay, don't come with us. We're going to go to a very dangerous part of town. Just get on the bus and go back to the hotel, and we'll see you when we get back there." And we sort of got up. So there's me and the photographer and the PR and a couple of sort of other people involved with the band who got on this tour bus to go back to the hotel, which and on the way back to the hotel, the bus trip, I think, must be one of the worst wrong turnings you can possibly take on the planet. And we, at like 1 o'clock in the morning, off our faces, we ended up in the queue to the American border. And this was, once you're in that queue, you can't turn around. And we've got no idea what's on this bus. I mean, you know what I mean? It's the band's bus. Could be anything on there. And they literally tore the bus apart. We were there for about 4 hours. They came on with guns and they woke the poor PR up with a gun in her face. And literally tore that bus apart, and it was terrifying, the whole thing.
Wow.
And they managed, after 4 hours, we got let into America after like dawn, and just turned around and drove straight back to Mexico. That was a pretty wild one. Stuff like that. I mean, I've missed so many flights going to do interviews with Hardfire, you wouldn't believe.
Right.
Things like that. I had a great time in Tokyo with Keeper Temple Claws. That was really good fun. We're drinking snake.
I love that band.
Snake scale drinks we were having and partying all night in various clubs. Was it Gas Panic? I think we went to Gas Panic. That was really good. And being on the last Libertines tour before they broke up was pretty wild as well, as I remember. Crazy scenes with the band literally sort of breaking up and collapsing around us, and Pete Doherty sort of like we were in Birmingham and he's saying, "Oh yeah, I've just got to go back to London to get some laundry." Right, okay, okay, off we go. Pete would disappear for 24 hours and turn up in Manchester. So yeah, stuff like that was quite fun.
You kind of touched on it, but how do you rate guitar bands of today compared to not only the noughties, but like all your experience of guitar bands?
How do I rate them now? I mean, I still think guitar bands are making some great stuff. I'm really interested in the sort of the psych and the exploratory stuff that you find a lot of bands are doing now. I'm kind of a little bit less interested when people go fully electronic and because ultimately that, I think, takes a little bit of humanity out of what they're doing, and there's a tendency towards sort of mainstream pop that always kind of creeps in a little bit to that I'm not necessarily as excited by as I am still to people coming on stage and screaming their guts out and thrashing away at guitars every now and then, which is why I'm still probably going to love Wolf Alice more than I'm going to love Tame Impala. But I do think that there's some really interesting noises being made, and there's some really exciting stuff. I mean, you look at a band. I mean, I've been really loving the new Heinz record recently, which is I think a really fascinating example. This is a band that over three albums have gone from being a very scratchy kind of lo-fi DIY sort of band who just seem to be doing it for larks. And over 2 albums, this new album is this sort of psychedelic wonder. It's absolutely fantastic. There's, these incredible noises that you'd expect more out of Flaming Lips or something like that. And the fact that bands can do that, the technology has developed to the point where, bands can explore all these sort of incredible landscapes. That's what makes me optimistic about what's going to come when guitar music is sort of comes back into fashion, if you like. And it seems to be happening fairly slowly, but I think the possibilities are there and enormous. When a band like Heinz can do it, I think it's out there for everyone to grab.
Let's hope so. Actually, I hope it does come back around pretty soon.
What's been a bit of a bugbear for me, and if people have been reading my columns, they'd know this, but and there has been a bit of bugbear for me in that I've been very annoyed that the aesthetic of the guitar band has been kind of stolen away, in the same way that in the Britpop era, the labels and the support networks were bought up essentially. Over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, what you see is the basic aesthetics of a guitar band. This sort of scruffy types will come along, but they're pop bands. They're boy bands really. Bastille are the ones that I've been particularly hammering on about. Sorry, Bastille, to be the fall guys for my concerns about this, but I just can't get my head around. Or it's not I can't get my head around it. I kind of find it frustrating and annoying that this was what was a sort of the sign of authenticity of a band has now just been commodified and monetized, and like, okay, an indie band now can still sound like a boy band, but I just find that really annoying that the idea of guitar music and indie music has just been sucked into pop music and pop music has been completely consumed everything, and we're all supposed to go, okay, yeah, no, everyone likes everything now, and so you must like pop music because everyone likes pop music. It's just like, do I have to? I don't really like pop music. It's not really for me. But look, we've got pop music now that looks like it should be for you. Oh yeah, but I still don't really like it. It's not all about the trousers. Does anyone care about being alternative to anything anymore? Who knows? We're not supposed to, really. We're supposed to like everything. So I don't know. Is there a culture there for that anymore? Is there necessarily a culture for feeling as though you like something that the mainstream doesn't like? And if so, where is it? Where can I find it?